Live from Johannesburg in South Africa, I'm Lulu Gabu in for Naledi Mulewa. Land reform is a complex process that requires a balancing act which African countries cannot afford politically, socially and economically. Our stakeholders need to play their part to ensure the long-term sustainability in viable partnerships. This is according to Peter Setou, Chief Executive of the Vumelana Advisory Fund, who now joins us on the line. Peter, good afternoon and thank you for joining us on Business Africa.
Good afternoon to you and the listenership.
Now, we've seen what has happened in some African countries regarding land reform. A case in point is Zimbabwe, our neighbor. What is needed to drive the success of land reform?
Thank you for that question. Success of land reform in South Africa requires closer collaboration of all the sector players, in particular government and the private sector, as well as the beneficiaries of land reform. This, for us, is really key in ensuring that we can deal with the challenges that continue to affect land reform. Over and above this, we as South Africans, there are a number of reports out there which have been commissioned by government, including Parliament. In this regard, I'm referring to the high-level panel report as well as the Motlanthe report, which have highlighted a number of challenges that need to be addressed in order for land reform to be streamlined and in order for land reform to really benefit the intended beneficiaries. And in this regard, I will just mention just but a few. We have to deal with, address issues around corruption. We've got to deal with dysfunctional and community property associations in particular, to ensure that they are supported, to ensure that there's proper governance and transparency. Post-settlement support is one of the crucial areas that we need to provide to the beneficiaries of land reform. Also, collaboration between various state entities in implementing the land reform program so that they do not really work in silos. In that way, we can really maximize the impact. Also, the whole issue around resources that are earmarked for the support of beneficiaries. We need to review and actually look at the way of increasing some of these resources, but also not just increasing these resources, ensure that the available resources are efficiently utilized for the benefit of land reform beneficiaries.
Now, what's the importance of these partnerships in this land reform program? What type of partnerships are these? And, going forward, you've touched on the issue of corruption, which has been a big issue for a lot of citizens of the country, and maybe also not really understanding what it means when you say government, private sector, and the beneficiaries themselves coming together and working together and support for the beneficiaries after the settlement has been made.
Yeah. The importance of partnership in land reform programs cannot really be emphasized. We all know that there's a huge demand on the government fiscal. So government on its own cannot really be expected to undertake the land reform program. There are a number of programs that are really competing for the available budgetary allocation, from your public health care to education to social services. So if we are really to ensure that land reform takes place in a sustainable manner, we need to draw in public or private sector players into the equation. Our work as Vumelana really bears testimony to the fact that partnerships between beneficiaries of land reform on the one hand and the private sector can be an immediate way of addressing the current challenges. Because in this relationship, the beneficiaries of land reform bring the land, while the private sector players bring access to finance, access to markets, and really the technical ability to work the land. I mean, by way of an example, since our existence over the last 10 years, we have supported about 25 community projects which would attract in excess of R1 billion in private investment, thus putting into productive use in excess of 72,000 hectares of land and impacting positively on more than 16,000 households. Now, one could look at this and actually say, look, this is a drop in an ocean. However, we believe that if we can replicate this across the country, we will really make the necessary dent to the existing stage of poverty, unemployment in the country.
With regards to the maintenance of these partnerships with investors and the elimination of risks for communities, how should we look forward to these?
Well, first and foremost, partnership, like any agreement, it's got to be based on a commercially sustainable basis, meaning it's got to make sense for both the private sector player as well as the communities, because if it's not sustainable, very soon things are going to fall through the cracks, So it must be fair to all the parties. It must not really be skewed in favor of one party to the detriment of the one party. So that is the first thing, Secondly, the parties need to be of the same mind with regard to the benefit flows. Meaning, if you enter into this agreement, it's got to be very clear in terms of what are the expectations, what should the community really expect in terms of benefit, in terms of the benefit flows. Because if you do not clarify this upfront, this is a clear recipe for disagreements and infighting at some later stage. Thirdly, like any other business relationships, the business relationship, there are always risks, and these risks must be properly allocated. Meaning, for example, if you say you give a certain percentage to the other party, you've got to make sure that they understand what that really means. For example, if you are saying you are a 50% partner in any business relationship, you need to realize that if there are challenges as a 50% partner, that's what's required of you. You need to contribute towards addressing those challenges. Perhaps the last point that I can relate to is lack of effective mechanisms to deal with disagreements. We need to make sure that there are alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, because in this kind of relationships, particularly where you've got communities, because they are group dynamics.
Sorry, I couldn't hear properly. Can you repeat, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please go ahead, Peter.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying in this kind of relationships, there's got to be clear mechanisms to deal with disagreements. You need to make sure that there are alternative dispute resolution mechanisms that can be put in place as soon as there are challenges.
Basically, managing conflict, implementing effective governance structures will ensure good partnerships and overseeing these partnerships going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, you're just raising an important point around good governance. This cannot just be overemphasized. You need to be transparent, because you are dealing with communities who have got, several members out there. There's got to be transparency. There's got to be governance, and that's really key. As an example, there is a need to have policies and procedures in place detailing and guiding how the business is going to be run, etc. Communities need to be supported to ensure that there is good governance. As you know, and most of our communities are not really that sophisticated. And in this regard, there is a need for government and organizations such as ourselves, Vumelana, to really partner to support communities to address issues like good governance and transparency. Lastly, regular feedback to the membership. I mean, our experience has been that if, as the leadership of a communal property association, if they fail to regularly give feedback to the membership, frequently you'll find that there's people are not happy. There are suspicions that monies or funds are being embezzled. So regular feedback is so key, including presenting annual reports like your annual audited financial statements, etc.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us on Business Africa this afternoon.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
That was Peter Setou, Chief Executive of the Vumelana Advisory Fund, and he was joining us on the line. You're listening to Business Africa, coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm Lulu Gabu. I'm in